Tell me his name, he said, and the entire cafe went quiet without anyone understanding why. I remember the smell of burnt espresso and steamed milk hanging in the air, the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking even though it was barely 68 degrees inside, and I wasn't cold. I had been fine 10 minutes earlier. Just another Thursday afternoon on Fifth Avenue. Just another shift in my apron with the loose thread at the pocket. I kept my sleeves pulled down even though they were too warm for early September, pretending I liked the fabric brushing my wrists. I didn't see Damien Moretti walk in, but I felt it. Conversations lowered. Chairs shifted. The bell above the door chimed once, soft and harmless, and yet something in the room changed shape. He didn't look like the rumors. He looked composed. Dark tailored suit. Crisp white shirt open at the collar. A watch that probably cost more than my rent for a year. He ordered black coffee. No sugar. No cream. His voice was calm, almost gentle. When I handed him the cup, my sleeve slipped. Just an inch. Just enough. His fingers closed lightly around my wrist before I could pull away. Not tight. Not painful. Just steady. His thumb brushed the faint discoloration on my skin like he was reading something written there. I tried to laugh. It's nothing, I said. My voice sounded far away, even to me. His jaw shifted slightly. A muscle ticking once. That was the only sign. Who did this to you, he asked. Not loud. Not angry. Controlled. The kind of control that makes you more afraid than shouting ever could. I looked around, suddenly aware of how small the cafe felt. 20 feet from counter to window. 8 tables. Nowhere to hide. It was an accident, I whispered. He held my gaze for 3 long seconds. Long enough for my pulse to betray me. Long enough for him to know I was lying. He released my wrist slowly, like he didn't want to damage something fragile. Go home, he said. That was it. No threats. No promises. Just 2 words. I watched him leave through the glass door, sunlight catching briefly in his dark hair. The bell chimed again. The room exhaled. I told myself it was over. That he would forget. That powerful men had bigger things to worry about than a barista with a bad excuse. But that night the city felt different. Quieter. Like it was holding its breath. And somewhere, miles away from my tiny 1-bedroom apartment with the flickering hallway light and the broken lock I kept meaning to fix, I had the strangest feeling that someone was asking the same question again, this time in a voice no one would dare lie to. That night, I did not turn on the lights when I got home. I stood inside my apartment with the door locked behind me, listening to the old refrigerator hum and the distant echo of traffic drifting up from the street 6 floors below. My place smelled like laundry detergent and stale coffee grounds. Safe. Ordinary. Small enough that I could cross from the kitchen to the bedroom in 12 steps. I kept telling myself that ordinary meant invisible. Invisible meant untouched. I set my keys on the counter and checked my phone. 3 missed calls. All from the same number. I did not need to listen to the voicemail to know the tone. Apologies mixed with anger. Promises wrapped around control. I slid the phone face down and pulled my sleeves over my hands again, even though no one was there to see. Around 9 o'clock the city siren started. Not close. Not right outside my building. Just somewhere out there, moving through blocks and avenues like restless wind. I told myself that sirens were normal in Manhattan. There were always sirens. Ambulances. Police. Fire trucks. It did not mean anything. But my chest felt tight anyway. Around midnight my phone buzzed with a news alert. A local business owner had stepped down suddenly. Another man connected to some kind of private security firm had left town without explanation. The headlines were careful, vague, but the pattern felt deliberate. I thought about the way Damien had looked at my wrist. Not shocked. Not confused. Certain. Like he had already decided something the moment he saw the truth. I moved to the window and parted the blinds just enough to see the street below. A black sedan was parked across from my building. Engine off. Lights off. Just sitting there. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor. Maybe it did not. I watched for 5 full minutes. No one got out. No one moved. At 1:30 in the morning my phone buzzed again. This time it was not him. It was my coworker, Jenna. Are you okay? She wrote. I heard something happened downtown tonight. I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed back that I was fine. That I was just tired. That I would see her tomorrow for the morning shift. I did not tell her that my hands were still shaking. I did not tell her that somewhere in the city men were whispering a name in low voices. At 2:15, I finally lay down on my bed without changing out of my clothes. I kept the lights off. I kept my phone beside me. Sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. Not angry, not cruel, focused, like I had become a problem that needed solving. Just before dawn, as gray light began to slip through the edges of my blinds, my phone vibrated one more time. A single message from an unknown number. Go to work. No one will bother you again. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I looked out the window. The black sedan was gone. The street was empty. And for the first time in months, the silence did not feel threatening. It felt claimed. I woke up before my alarm, the gray light of 6:30 in the morning stretching across my ceiling like a quiet warning, and for a moment I forgot everything until I rolled onto my side and saw the message still glowing on my phone screen. Go to work. No one will bother you again. I read it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning, for threat, for promise, but the words were simple and controlled, just like him. The shower water ran hot against my skin, and I watched the faint discoloration on my wrist fade into something easier to explain. I chose a short-sleeve blouse that morning, not because I was brave, because I was tired of hiding. The walk to the subway felt different. The air was crisp, around 60 degrees, the kind of early fall morning that usually made me feel hopeful. Today it felt charged. People stood a little straighter. Conversations were quieter. 2 men in suits near the entrance were speaking in low voices about someone stepping down from a position overnight, sudden departures, closed offices, resignations, words that sounded clean on the surface. I kept my head down and boarded the train. When I pushed open the cafe door at 7:45, Jenna was already there. She looked at me like she expected to see something broken. You look okay, she said carefully. I nodded. I am. And for the first time in months, that was not entirely a lie. The morning rush came fast. Espresso machines screaming. Milk steaming. Orders stacking up. I moved behind the counter with practiced rhythm, 12-ounce cups, 16-ounce cups, names written in black marker. I almost convinced myself it had all been a strange dream until the door opened at exactly 9:15. He did not bring an entourage. He did not need one. Damien stepped inside like he owned the square footage beneath his shoes. Same dark suit. Same calm presence. The line instinctively parted without anyone understanding why. He did not look at the menu. He looked at me. I felt the space between us tighten. I poured his coffee before he even asked. My hands were steady this time. When I set the cup down, he did not reach for my wrist. He simply let his gaze drift there, verifying something unseen. Satisfied. Did you sleep? He asked quietly. It was such an ordinary question that it unsettled me more than anything else. A little, I answered. He studied my face, as if measuring fear in inches. You will not receive any more calls, he said. Not boastful, not dramatic, stated like fact. My phone vibrated in my apron pocket at that exact moment. I froze. Slowly, I pulled it out. No missed calls. No new messages. Just a blank screen. Silence. Real silence. My chest tightened, but not from panic this time. From realization. He had not raised his voice. He had not made threats. He had simply adjusted the world around me. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. He held my gaze for a long second. Because you should not have to live afraid, he said. Then he picked up his coffee, nodded once, and walked back into the sunlight like the city itself had opened a path for him. And for the first time, I understood that safety, in his world, was not requested. It was enforced. Power changes the air around you, even when no one says a word. That was the first thing I understood after he walked out of the cafe. The rest of the morning moved like any other. Orders. Phone. The steady rhythm of the register opening and closing. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Around 10:30 my phone buzzed again. I glanced at it, expecting the familiar knot in my stomach. Unknown number. I let it ring once. Twice. Then it stopped. No voicemail. No follow-up text. Just silence. I waited for the anxiety to crash over me. It did not. The silence held. It stayed. Jenna leaned close while wiping down the counter. He came back, she whispered. I nodded. Yes. She looked toward the door as if expecting him to reappear. Do you know who he is? She asked. I hesitated. Everyone in Manhattan knew the name Damien Moretti in some way. In headlines that never quite said enough. In rumors about contracts and negotiations and businesses that always seemed to land in his favor. But knowing and understanding were two different things. I know enough, I said quietly. At noon, sunlight poured through the front windows, warming the tile floor. I caught my reflection in the glass. Shoulders straighter. Chin lifted slightly. The bruise on my wrist had faded to a pale yellow. It looked smaller somehow, like fear itself had shrunk overnight. The afternoon slowed, and with it my thoughts grew louder. He had not asked for anything in return. No favor. No gratitude. No loyalty. He had simply corrected something he found unacceptable. That realization unsettled me more than if he had demanded payment. Around 3 in the afternoon, the cafe door opened again. This time he did not come in alone. 2 men followed a few steps behind, both in dark suits, both silent. They remained near the entrance. Damien approached the counter with the same measured pace. "Walk with me," he said softly. It was not a command shouted across a room. It was a request shaped like inevitability. Jenna's eyes widened, but I untied my apron slowly and handed it to her. The sidewalk outside felt cooler than it had that morning. A light breeze moved between the buildings, carrying the distant sound of traffic. We stopped near the curb, 5 feet from the entrance. Close enough that I could still see the espresso machine through the glass. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. The question was direct, honest. I considered it carefully. "I do not know," I admitted. He nodded once, as if that answer satisfied him. "Good," he said. "You should never be comfortable around power. But you should never be harmed by it either." His eyes searched my face, not for weakness, but for truth. "No one will approach you again," he continued. "If anyone does, you call this number." He held out a small card. Thick paper, minimal print, just a phone number and his name. I did not take it immediately. "Why me?" I asked again. The city noise seemed to dim around us. He exhaled slowly. "Because when I saw your wrist, I saw fear. And I do not tolerate fear near me." He placed the card gently into my hand, his fingers brushing mine only briefly. Not possessive, not demanding, controlled. Then he stepped back. "Live your life," he said. And for the first time, the words sounded less like protection and more like permission. The card felt heavier than it should have as I stood on the sidewalk watching him disappear into the late afternoon traffic. The city noise slowly swelling back to normal around me, like nothing extraordinary had just happened. I looked down at the thick white paper in my hand, his name printed in clean black letters, the phone number beneath it simple and direct. No logo, no title, no explanation. Just Damien Moretti. I slipped it into my purse carefully, as if it were fragile, and walked back inside the cafe. Jenna stared at me the moment I crossed the threshold. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded, but I did not trust my voice yet. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine. Steam, orders, polite smiles. Yet something inside me had shifted in a way I could not undo. Around 5:30, my phone buzzed again. This time it was not an unknown number. It was my landlord, confirming that the broken hallway light had already been repaired. That was strange. I had reported it weeks ago. An hour later, I received an email from the building management office stating that additional security cameras had been installed in the lobby and parking area effective immediately. I had not requested that either. I did not need to ask who had made the call. The pattern was too precise, too quiet. When my shift ended at 7, I stepped outside into air that had cooled to around 62 degrees. The sky above Manhattan was streaked with orange and pale purple. The city looked beautiful, untouchable. I walked to the subway without looking over my shoulder. That alone felt like a miracle. When I reached my building, the front entrance light burned steady and bright. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint. Everything felt maintained, guarded. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. No missed calls. No angry messages. No apologies disguised as control. The silence remained intact. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and took the card out again, placing it on the small wooden table beside my couch. I stared at it for a long time. This was not romance. It was not charity. It was not coincidence. It was influence applied with surgical precision. I should have been frightened by that. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar rising in my chest. Relief. Not because someone powerful had intervened, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had noticed without being asked. Around 9 o'clock, my phone vibrated softly. My pulse jumped despite myself. A single message. Unknown number. "Are you home safe?" Not a question mark. Not a command. A statement that waited for confirmation. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering above the keyboard. I could ignore it. I could pretend I never saw it. But I did not. I typed back 2 words. Yes. Thank you. The response came almost immediately. Good. That was all. No demand. No expectation. Just that. I set the phone down and leaned back against my couch, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant echo of traffic 6 floors below. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Busy, loud, relentless. But inside my small apartment, something had changed. The fear that once lived in the corners of the room no longer had space to breathe. And for the first time, I understood that power did not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it arrived softly, asked one question, and rearranged the entire skyline by morning. Peace can feel unfamiliar when you have lived too long waiting for noise. The next morning I woke, up before my alarm again, but this time my heart was steady. No missed calls. No messages waiting to ruin the day. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin golden lines, warming the small space between my couch and kitchen counter. I made coffee slowly, listening to the quiet of my apartment like it was something sacred. When I stepped outside, the hallway lights were still bright, the new security camera mounted neatly in the corner above the elevator. I caught my reflection in its black lens for a second and felt an odd sense of reassurance. Someone was watching, but not to control me, to protect the perimeter. At the cafe, the morning rush hit hard as usual. Tourists, office workers, students with laptops and headphones. Life moving forward in predictable rhythms. I found comfort in that rhythm. Around 9:30, a delivery truck blocked part of the sidewalk outside, and for a split second my chest tightened from old instinct. Then it passed. No one approached me. No one raised their voice. No one demanded explanations. The absence of chaos felt louder than any confrontation ever had. Jenna leaned against the counter beside me during a slow moment. "You look different," she said softly. I almost laughed. "Different how?" She shrugged. "Lighter." I did not answer, because I knew exactly what she meant. Around noon, the cafe door opened, and Damien walked in again. No entourage this time. No dramatic shift in the room. Just him, steady and composed. I poured his coffee without asking. He stood a few feet away from the counter, watching the steam rise from the cup. "Has anyone contacted you?" he asked quietly. "No," I replied. The word felt solid. Real. He nodded once, as if checking off an invisible list. Good. He did not smile often, but something in his eyes softened slightly. Not possessive, not demanding, simply satisfied. "You are adjusting," he said. I looked up at him. "To what?" He considered the question carefully. "To not being afraid," he answered. The honesty of that statement startled me more than anything else he had done. Fear had become background noise in my life. I had almost forgotten what silence felt like. "I did not ask you to fix anything," I said gently. He held my gaze without flinching. "I know." That was it. No justification. No explanation. Just acknowledgement. The cafe. Noise continued around us. Milk steaming, chairs scraping against tile, someone laughing near the window. Ordinary life unfolding in inches and seconds. He stepped back slightly, giving me space. "Live normally," he said. "You deserve that." The words lingered long after he left. That evening, as I walked home under a sky painted in pale pink and fading blue, I realized something unexpected. He had not taken control of my life. He had removed something that did not belong there. The fear, the tension, the constant waiting for impact. And in its place, he had left something quieter. Choice. For the first time in a long time, I was not surviving. I was simply living. And somewhere in the city, a man who commanded entire blocks and boardrooms had decided that my peace was non-negotiable. Control is easy to accept when it feels like protection, but I began to understand that protection has edges. A week passed without incident. No unexpected calls. No raised voices. No shadows waiting at the end of my street. The bruise on my wrist disappeared completely, leaving only pale skin and a faint memory. Life settled into something steady. I worked my shifts. I walked home under streetlights that no longer felt threatening. I slept through the night, without waking at every passing siren. But peace has a way of making you notice what remains. On Thursday evening, after a long shift that left my feet aching and my hair smelling like espresso, I decided not to take the subway. The air was cool, around 58 degrees, and the city felt almost gentle. I walked the 12 blocks home, listening to the rhythm of traffic and distant music spilling from an open restaurant door. Halfway down Madison Avenue, I felt it again. Not fear. Awareness. A black sedan rolled slowly past me before parking half a block ahead. My chest tightened, not from panic, but from recognition. I stopped walking. The passenger door opened, and one of the men I had seen behind Damien stepped out. Dark suit. Calm expression. He did not approach me aggressively. He simply stood there, waiting. I walked the remaining distance between us, keeping my shoulders straight. Is something wrong? I asked. He shook his head. No. Mississippi Mr. Moretti prefers you do not walk alone at night. The words were polite, respectful, and yet something inside me bristled. I did not ask for an escort, I said quietly. He nodded once. Understood. He did not move. I looked past him at the car. The tinted windows reflected the streetlights. I knew he was inside, watching, not because he did not trust me, because he trusted nothing else. I stepped around the suited man and continued walking. The car did not follow. That was deliberate, a message in restraint. When I reached my building, the lobby was brighter than usual. The front desk attendant I had never seen before nodded at me as I passed. Inside my apartment, I closed the door and leaned against it, heart beating faster than I expected. This was the line. Protection and control were standing inches apart, and I needed to know which side I was on. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. I did not hesitate this time. Yes, I answered. Silence for a second. Then his voice. Calm. Controlled. You walk tonight. It was not a question. Yes, I replied. Alone. Another pause. That is not advisable. I inhaled slowly. It is my choice. The silence on the other end stretched longer this time. Not angry. Measuring. You are correct, he said finally. It is. I closed my eyes briefly, surprised by the ease of his concession. I do not want to feel monitored, I added. I want to feel safe. The distinction hung between us. He understood it. I could hear it in the way he exhaled. There is a difference, he said quietly. I will adjust. The line went dead. No argument. No insistence. I set my phone down and looked around my small apartment. The space felt like mine again. Not guarded territory. Not a perimeter under watch. Just a home. And for the first time since he had stepped into my life, I realized something important. Power can shield you from harm. But real strength is knowing when to step back. And he was learning that as quickly as I was. Respect changes the tone of power, and the following week proved that he had meant what he said. There were no more black sedans waiting half a block away. No unfamiliar men lingering near the entrance of my building. The lobby attendant returned to the older man who usually sat behind the desk reading the newspaper. It was subtle, the difference, but I noticed it. The air around me felt unoccupied again. On Monday afternoon, the cafe was unusually quiet. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, turning the sidewalks outside a reflective gray. The temperature had dropped to 55 degrees, and customers lingered longer over their drinks, reluctant to step back into the drizzle. I was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed softly. He stepped inside alone. No signal. No shift in the room this time. Just Damien, shaking a few raindrops from his coat before approaching the counter. I poured his coffee without asking, the movement familiar now. He watched my hands, not my wrist. That felt intentional. You walked home again last night, he said calmly. It was not accusation. It was observation. Yes, I replied. He nodded. Alone. Yes. A small pause. Then, no one followed you. It was not a question. I studied him for a moment. Did you have someone checking? I asked. He held my gaze evenly. No, the word was simple. Direct. I believed him. That realization surprised me more than anything else. Trust is not built through grand gestures. It grows in restraint. He took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes thoughtful. There are situations where force is necessary, he said quietly. But there are also situations where presence is enough. I leaned against the counter slightly. And which is this? I asked. He looked around the cafe, at the rain streaking down the windows, at the couple laughing softly in the corner booth, at the ordinary life unfolding in small, unremarkable details. Then he looked back at me. This, he said, is presence. The words settled between us like something deliberate. Outside, a bus rolled past, water spraying lightly from its tires. Inside, the espresso machine hissed again. The world remained steady. I do not need guards on my street, I said gently. I need to know I can choose my own path. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. And you can, he replied. You always could. I tilted my head slightly. That is not entirely true. A faint shift in his expression acknowledged that. He set his empty cup down on the counter. Perhaps I misjudged the line, he admitted. The honesty in his tone was quiet but undeniable. Powerful men do not often admit misjudgment. You are not something to secure, he continued. You are someone to respect. The words did not sound rehearsed. They sounded earned. I felt the tension that had lingered in my chest since that night on Madison Avenue loosen a fraction more. Rain continued to fall outside, steady and unhurried. Then respect my choices, I said softly. His eyes held mine for a long second. I will. No flourish. No vow dramatized. Just a commitment stated plainly. He stepped back from the counter, adjusting his coat. If you ever need help, he added, you ask. Not because you are afraid, but because you decide. I watched him leave, the bell chiming gently behind him. The rain did not stop. The city did not pause. But something inside me shifted again. Power had learned its boundary. And for the first time, it felt balanced. There is a difference between being protected and being seen, and I did not understand that until the night everything tested itself again. 2 weeks passed in steady rhythm. Work, walks home, evenings that felt almost ordinary. The card with his name remained in the small drawer beside my couch, untouched, but not forgotten. On Friday, the cafe closed early for a private event, and I found myself stepping out onto Madison Avenue, just after 9:30. The air was colder now, around 50 degrees, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain that had not yet fallen. I wrapped my coat tighter and started the 12-block walk home, my boots tapping softly against the sidewalk. Halfway down the street, I heard my name. Not shouted, not angry, just familiar. My steps slowed before I could stop myself. He stood near the entrance of a building across the street, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, watching me with that same measured calm. Damien did not approach immediately. He waited until I crossed toward him. You are out later than usual, he said. I studied his expression. No accusation. No edge. Just observation. The cafe closed early, I replied. He nodded once. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Traffic moved behind us in steady streams of headlights and taillights. You do not have anyone walking you tonight, he said. It was not a question. No, I answered. I do not need one. A small pause. He exhaled softly. I know. The simplicity of. That response surprised me. Then why are you here? I asked. His gaze shifted briefly to the skyline before returning to me. Because I was already nearby, he said. And I prefer to see for myself that you are well. I searched his face for something possessive, something controlling, but found only steadiness. Seeing is different from monitoring, I said quietly. It is, he agreed. The wind picked up slightly, brushing loose strands of my hair across my cheek. He noticed, but did not reach out to move them. That restraint mattered more than he probably understood. You have been quiet, he added after a moment. No messages. I held his gaze. You said I should ask if I needed help. I have not needed it. A faint hint of approval flickered in his eyes. Good, he said. That means the correction was sufficient. The word correction lingered between us. It sounded clinical. Controlled. You changed more than one thing, I said carefully. He did not deny it. Sometimes, he replied. Removing one threat reveals the others. I felt the truth of that in ways I had not expected. It was not only the absence of phone calls or raised voices. It was the absence of tension in my shoulders. The absence of fear in my chest. We stood there for another quiet moment, the city humming around us. Walk with me, he said softly. Not because I needed protection. Not because he demanded it. Just because he was there. I considered it. Then I nodded. We fell into step side by side, two silhouettes moving through Manhattan's cool night air. He did not touch me. He did not guide me. He simply matched my pace. And for the first time, it felt less like a shield and more like a choice we were both making. The city feels different when you walk beside someone who never hurries. Our steps fell into quiet rhythm along Madison Avenue, his stride steady, unforced, matching mine without overtaking it. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and exhaust, headlights streaking past in long white lines. For several blocks we said nothing. The silence was not heavy. It was deliberate. I was the one who broke it. Do you ever get tired? I asked. He glanced at me slightly. Of what? Of controlling everything. The corner of his mouth shifted, almost a smile. But not quite. Control is often overstated, he said. Influence is quieter. I considered that. It did not feel quiet, I replied. When you rearranged parts of my life. He did not deny it. He looked ahead at the skyline instead, the glass towers reflecting scattered city lights. Fear spreads quickly, he said after a moment. It creates instability. I remove instability. His voice was calm, analytical, like he was explaining a business decision instead of something deeply personal. I am not a project, I said softly. He stopped walking. Not abruptly, just enough to face me fully. The traffic continued behind us, indifferent. I know, he said. His eyes held mine, steady and unflinching. That is why I adjusted. The honesty in that statement unsettled me in a different way than power ever had. You could have ignored it, I said. Many people do. A faint shadow crossed his expression. I do not ignore what I witness, he replied. The words were simple, but they carried weight. We resumed walking, the distance to my building shrinking with each block. I became aware of how close we were, not physically, but in presence. He did not touch me. He did not guide me. Yet the air between us felt charged with unspoken understanding. If I had said no that first day, I asked quietly. If I had told you to stay out of it, would you have? He exhaled slowly, considering. No, he answered. There was no hesitation. But I would have found another way. I absorbed that truth carefully. It was not romantic. It was not possessive. It was simply the nature of who he was. When my building came into view, its bright lobby lights steady against the night, I slowed. This is where we separate, I said. He nodded once. Yes. Neither of us moved immediately. The wind brushed lightly against my coat again. You do not have to walk me every time, I added. I know, he replied. Tonight was not about protection. I tilted my head slightly. Then what was it about? For the first time since I had met him, his composure softened just enough to reveal something quieter underneath. It was about choice, he said. Yours. And mine. I felt the weight of that settle in my chest. Choice. Not obligation. Not correction. Not surveillance. Just two people standing on a Manhattan sidewalk. At nearly 10:30 at night, deciding what this was becoming. I stepped backward toward the entrance. Good night, Damien, I said. He inclined his head slightly. Good night. I watched him walk away this time, his figure blending into the moving lines of the city without needing to command them. And as I entered my building, I realized something had shifted again. The power that once felt overwhelming no longer pressed against me. It stood beside me, and that made all the difference. The next morning felt quieter than it should have, as if the city itself was waiting to see what I would decide next. I woke before sunrise, the pale light stretching across my ceiling in thin gray lines. For a moment I stayed still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of early traffic 6 floors below. My phone rested on the nightstand beside me, silent. No urgent messages. No disruptions. Just a blank screen reflecting the room. I reached for it anyway. Not because I was afraid. Because I was aware. There is a difference. At the cafe, the morning crowd came in waves. Business suits. Students. A woman arguing softly into her headset about a delayed shipment. Ordinary chaos. I moved behind the counter with steady hands, pouring coffee, calling out names, wiping down the stainless steel surface until it gleamed. Around 10:15, the door opened, and he stepped inside. Alone again. The bell chimed lightly above him, almost respectful. He did not come straight to the counter this time. He stood near the window, watching the street outside, as if measuring something unseen. I felt his presence before I saw him. Not pressure, not control, just awareness. I finished the drink in my hand and walked toward him instead of waiting. You are early, I said quietly. He turned slightly, studying my face as if confirming something only he understood. I was nearby, he replied. It was becoming a familiar phrase. You are often nearby, I said. There was no accusation in my tone, only curiosity. His eyes held mine for a long second. Manhattan is not as large as it appears, he answered calmly. I folded my arms lightly across my chest. Or perhaps your influence makes it smaller. A faint shift crossed his expression, something between amusement and recognition. Influence does not shrink the city, he said. It only clarifies it. The words lingered between us. Outside, A taxi honked once before pulling away from the curb. The sky had cleared overnight, the air crisp at around 52 degrees. I do not want my world clarified by someone else, I said softly. I want to understand it myself. He did not interrupt. He never did when the truth was being spoken. Then you will, he replied. With or without me. That answer surprised me more than any display of power ever could. And you are comfortable with that? I asked. He stepped closer, not invading my space, just closing the distance enough that I could see the subtle lines at the corner of his eyes. Comfort is irrelevant, he said quietly. Respect is not. The sincerity in his tone unsettled me in the best way. For weeks, I had measured him by the weight of what he could do. Now I was beginning to measure him by what he chose not to do. You are changing, I observed. He studied me carefully. No, he said after a moment. I am adapting. I let that settle. The espresso machine hissed behind me. Someone laughed near the counter, life moving forward in inches and seconds. Then adapt to this, I said gently. I do not need to be saved. I need to be trusted. He held my gaze steadily, and for the first time, I saw something unguarded flicker beneath the calm. Trust, he repeated quietly, as if testing the word. Then he nodded once. Very well. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it felt like the most significant promise he had made so far. Trust sounds simple until it is tested. After that morning in the cafe, he did not come by for 3 days. No unexpected appearances. No subtle confirmations that he was nearby. Just space. Real space. I told myself that was what I had asked for. On the 4th evening, the sky over Manhattan turned the color of burnished copper as the sun dipped behind the buildings. The temperature hovered around 50 degrees, cool enough to make people walk a little faster, collars turned up against the breeze. I left the cafe later than usual because Jenna had called in sick, and the quiet rhythm of closing tasks felt heavier alone. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. Not him. Someone else. A face I recognized from another chapter of my life. My pulse skipped before I could control it. He did not approach aggressively. He simply stood there, hands shoved into the pockets of a worn jacket, eyes searching mine with something that looked like regret. The sight of him did not bring fear the way it once had. It brought clarity. I stayed where I was. The distance between us measured perhaps 20 feet, but it felt symbolic. I just want to talk, he called softly. His voice did not carry the edge it used to. I inhaled slowly. There is nothing left to say, I replied. The words came out steady, honest. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if remembering a boundary that had not existed before. You disappeared, he said. Everything changed overnight. I almost smiled at that. Everything had changed, just not in the way he assumed. I did not disappear, I answered. I stopped tolerating what I should not have. A long pause stretched between us. Passing cars blurred the space, headlights flickering across his face, and then mine. For a moment, I wondered if he would push further, if old patterns would try to reassert themselves. But he did not. He looked at me as if trying to understand something he had never considered before. Are you afraid of me? He asked quietly. I held his gaze without flinching. No, I said, and I meant it. The absence of fear felt solid, like standing on stable ground after months of shifting sand. He nodded slowly, perhaps recognizing that the dynamic had altered in ways he could not control. I am sorry, he added after a moment. The apology hung in the air, simple and late. I did not reject it. I did not embrace it either. Goodbye, I said gently. Then I turned and began walking toward my building. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not scan for black sedans or dark silhouettes. I simply walked. Halfway down the block, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Unknown number. My breath caught for a fraction of a second before I answered. Yes. Silence for a beat. Then his voice, calm and controlled. You handled it. Not a question. An acknowledgement. I continued walking. I did, I replied. Without interference. Hey. Pause on the other end. Then, quietly, I know. That single statement carried more weight than any display of influence ever could. He had trusted me to face the moment myself. He had chosen not to step in. And as I reached the entrance of my building, key already in hand, I realized something important. Protection can create safety, but trust creates strength. And tonight, for the first time, both existed without competing. Morning light has a way of revealing what the night quietly decided. I woke before the alarm again. But this time there was no tension waiting in my chest. The memory of the sidewalk, of standing my ground without fear, lingered like something solid beneath my feet. I made coffee in the small kitchen of my apartment, the scent rising warm and steady, and I realized that the silence around me no longer felt borrowed. It felt earned. Outside, Manhattan was already moving. Delivery trucks idled at the curb. A jogger passed beneath my window. The temperature hovered near 53 degrees, crisp but clear. At the cafe, the morning unfolded in its usual rhythm. I tied my apron, greeted regular customers, called out orders in a voice that did not shake. Around 10, the bell above the door chimed softly. I did not need to look up to know it was him. I felt the shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. He approached the counter without urgency. No entourage, no dramatic presence. Just Damien, hands resting lightly against the polished wood as I poured his coffee. "You are steady," he observed quietly. I met his gaze. "I am." He studied my expression, as if confirming something deeper than words. "He will not return," he said calmly. It was not a threat. It was not a promise of consequence. It was simply a statement of certainty. I held his eyes for a long second. "He does not need to," I replied. "I am not the same person." A faint acknowledgement crossed his features. "Not pride. Not possession. Recognition." "That is clear," he said. The cafe buzzed around us, a low hum of ordinary life. A couple near the window laughed over shared headphones. Someone tapped impatiently at a laptop keyboard. The world continued, indifferent to the quiet exchange happening at the counter. "You trusted me," I said softly. "Last night." He did not look away. "Yes." The simplicity of that answer carried more weight than any display of power ever could. I rested my hands against the counter, leaning forward slightly. "And you did not lose control." A subtle exhale escaped him, almost reflective. "Control was never the objective," he replied. "Stability was." I tilted my head slightly. "There is a difference." He nodded once. "I am learning it." The honesty in that admission felt more intimate than anything else we had shared. He picked up his cup, but did not immediately leave. "You are not someone to rescue," he said quietly. "You are someone to stand beside." The words settled between us, unforced and steady. I felt something shift again, not in fear, not in tension, but in balance. "Then stand," I answered gently. He held my gaze for one last second, something softer flickering behind the calm. "I intend to." He turned and walked toward the door, the bell chiming softly as he stepped back into the sunlight. I watched him go, not because I was afraid he would disappear, but because I understood now that neither of us was claiming ownership over the other. We were choosing alignment. And in a city that thrives on power and pressure, that choice felt rarer than anything money or influence could buy. I picked up the next cup, called out the next name, and continued moving forward. Not protected, not monitored, not rescued, just steady. And somewhere in the city, a man who could command entire rooms had learned that the strongest position is not in front or behind, but beside.